He thought he had finally won. He thought that the moment my grandfather's casket was lowered into the ground, the last obstacle between him and everything he'd ever wanted had disappeared with it. He was wrong. I was sitting at work eating a sad granola bar for lunch. Died on a T1 he'd slept in for 40 years. I was holding his hand. My uncle was not there. He was on a golf course in Scottsdale, and I know this because he sent me a text at 7:43 a.m. that said, "Keep me posted, keep me posted." Like I was his assistant, like I was updating him on a conference call instead of sitting next to the man who raised us both, watching him take his last breath. My grandfather's name was Harold. Everyone called him Harry. He built his construction company from nothing, literally from a second-hand truck and a handshake deal with a contractor in 1978. By the time I was born, Whitfield and Sons had become one of the most respected mid-sized commercial construction firms in the state of Ohio. He had 300 employees. He had contracts with school districts, hospitals, county governments. He had a reputation that took 40 years to build and that he protected like it was made of glass. He also had one son, my uncle, whose name I will not say here with any warmth because he doesn't deserve it. And he had me. My mother was my grandfather's daughter, his only daughter, the one who married the wrong man at 22 and spent the next decade trying to leave him safely. She died when I was 9. A car accident on I-71 in February. Black ice. Nothing anyone could have done. After that, my grandfather became my everything. He didn't have to. He chose to. He drove me to school and sat in the back of every school play and learned how to braid hair from a YouTube tutorial because he didn't want me to go to picture day looking like nobody cared. Nobody talks about what it means to be raised by a 70-year-old man who still wakes up at 5 in the morning out of habit and doesn't know what TikTok is. It means you grow up a little old-fashioned. It means you know how to read a blueprint and shake a hand and look someone in the eye. It means you sit at the dinner table every night and talk about your day because that's what he knew. It also means that when he got sick, really sick, the kind of sick that doesn't get better, you are the one who moves back home. You don't think twice about it. I had a small apartment in Columbus. I had a job I liked, managing accounts for a commercial real estate firm. I had a life that was just starting to feel like mine. And I packed it into boxes and drove it home because there was no version of reality in which I wasn't going to be the one sitting in that house with him. My uncle did not offer to help. He and his wife came for Christmas that year and stayed 4 days. He spent most of it on his phone. On the last day, before they drove back to their house in Dublin, the one my grandfather had helped him buy, he pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "You know he's going to leave the business to me, right? I'm the one with the business background." I remember looking at him for a long moment. He was 61 years old and he had never once worked a full week at Whitfield and Sons. He had a title there, vice president of something, but everyone who actually worked there knew that my grandfather carried him, had been carrying him for 30 years. "Okay," I said. He looked at me like he expected a fight. When I didn't give him one, he seemed almost disappointed. I went back to taking care of my grandfather. For 14 months, that was my life. Medications and doctor's appointments and physical therapy and the long, slow conversations we had in the evenings when he was tired but couldn't sleep. He told me things he'd never told anyone. About my mother. About the early years of the company. The times he almost lost everything. About a woman he'd loved before my grandmother and how he'd never stopped wondering about her. I didn't tell anyone those things. They belonged to him. I just listened. His attorney, a man named Mr. Calloway, who had worked with my grandfather for 25 years, came to the house twice in those 14 months. I offered him coffee. I stepped out of the room. Whatever they talked about was between them, and I didn't ask. My uncle called maybe once a month. The conversations were always short. He always asked how things were going, which I understood to mean the business, not my grandfather. Near the end, when it became clear we were counting weeks and not months, he started calling more. He started talking about transition planning. He started using words like continuity and legacy in a way that made my jaw hurt. My grandfather died on a Tuesday. The funeral was on Friday. It was a bigger service than I expected. 300 people, maybe more, people I didn't know. People who came up to me and told me that Harry Whitfield had given them their first job, or written them a reference, or shown up to help when something went wrong on a project. I stood in that receiving line for 3 hours, and I cried through most of it, not because I was performing grief, but because I was genuinely hollowed out, the way you are when the person who was your whole foundation is suddenly gone. My uncle gave the eulogy. It was fine. It was mostly about himself. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, I sat in my grandfather's chair in the living room and I didn't move for a very long time. I was thinking about what came next. I was thinking about moving back to Columbus, finding a new apartment, figuring out what my life looked like now. I was thinking about whether I should reach out to my old firm or start fresh somewhere. I was not thinking about the will. I should say that clearly, because later, much later, my uncle would imply that I had been calculating this whole time, that I had some kind of plan. I want to be honest, I did not have a plan. I had a grandfather who I loved and who I had taken care of and who was gone. And I was sitting in his chair at 11 o'clock on a Friday night trying to remember how to breathe. My uncle came into the room around 11:30. His wife had gone to bed. He sat down across from me and he had a drink in his hand and he looked at me with an expression I can only describe as prepared. "The reading's on Monday," he said. "I know. Mr. Calloway called me this afternoon before the service." I looked at him. "Okay. I just want you to know," he said, "that whatever happens on Monday, I want this transition to be smooth. Dad would have wanted that." "Sure." He took a sip of his drink. "I've been talking to some people about the operational structure going forward. I have some changes in mind that I think will really modernize things." I remember thinking he already knows. Whatever was in that will, he already knew, and he was trying to be gracious about it in that way that people are gracious when they've already won. "Great," I said. "Sounds like you got it figured out." He nodded. And then he said, and I want to be very precise here because I have replayed this sentence in my head probably 1,000 times. "You've been a real trooper, taking care of things here. But I think it's time for you to get back to your own life. I'm going to need the house." I stared at him. "I'll give you until Sunday evening," he said, "to get your things together. That should be enough time." I was so stunned I didn't say anything. I just sat there while he finished his drink and said goodnight and went upstairs to the bedroom that had been my grandfather's bedroom, the one I had vacated for him and his wife because it was the biggest. I sat in that chair for another hour. Then I went upstairs to the small room I'd been sleeping in for 14 months and I started to pack. I want to tell you that I had some kind of dignified, composed response to what happened. I did not. I cried the entire time I was packing. I was sadran, eating a sadran Ubizik. I was sitting a sadran $340 in my checking account because I had not been working full-time for over a year and I had been spending my savings slowly and quietly and I hadn't wanted to ask my grandfather for money because it felt wrong. It felt like mixing things up that shouldn't be mixed. $340. My car was paid off. I had a credit card with about $800 on it. That was the whole picture. I drove away from that house on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. because I couldn't sleep anyway and I didn't want to be there when my uncle came downstairs. I sat in the parking lot of a Panera about 2 miles away and I drank a coffee I couldn't really afford. And I tried to think clearly. I called my college roommate, Bethany. She lived in Akron with her husband and their 2 kids. She said, "Come now," without even asking why. I drove to Akron. I slept on their couch for 2 nights and I ate dinner with her family and I helped her kids with their homework just to have something to do with my hands. Bethany didn't push me to talk. She just kept making sure my coffee cup was full, which is its own kind of love. Sunday evening, I got a text from my uncle that said, "House is clear." I didn't respond. Monday morning, I drove to Mr. Calloway's office in downtown Cleveland. It was a small office, the kind with wood paneling and framed diplomas, and a receptionist who had probably been there since 1995. My uncle was already in the waiting room when I arrived. His wife was with him. He looked surprised to see me, which told me he had assumed I wouldn't come. We sat in Mr. Giste Calloway's office, the three of us, plus Mr. Calloway and a junior associate, and Mr. Calloway read my grandfather's will. My uncle received the house and $400,000 in cash from my grandfather's personal savings account. He also received my grandfather's car, a 2019 F-150 that my grandfather had loved, and certain personal property, furniture, a watch collection. I received Whitfield and Sons Construction in its entirety. 100% of the shares, the real estate the company owned, the equipment, the contracts, the accounts, everything that had taken my grandfather 40 years to build. There was also a letter. Mr. Galloway handed it to me across the desk. It was in my grandfather's handwriting, 3 pages, and I'm not going to share what it said because it was mine. But I will tell you the first line. I know you didn't do this for any of this. That's exactly why it's yours. I looked up from the letter. My uncle's face had gone a color I don't have a good word for. Somewhere between grey and white. His wife had her hand on his arm. This isn't right, he said. His voice was very quiet. Mr. Calloway said, the will was updated 8 months ago and witnessed by 2 attorneys and a notary. It's legally sound. He wasn't. My uncle started. He wasn't in his right mind 8 months ago. He was sick. He was ill, Mr. Gallett. Calloway said carefully. He was not incapacitated. I spoke with him at length on several occasions. His intentions were clear. My uncle turned to me. You did this. You were here. You had access. I didn't know, I said. And I meant it. I genuinely did not know. He didn't believe me. I could see that. I'm not sure he'll ever believe me, and I made a kind of peace with that. I walked out of that office holding 3 pages of my grandfather's handwriting and the weight of everything he'd built. The first 3 months were the hardest thing I've ever done. I were to be honest about that because I think people hear she inherited the company and imagine it like winning the lottery. It was not like that. It was like being handed the controls of an airplane while it was already in the air and being told to figure it out. I called my old boss, a woman named Sandra who had always been straight with me, and I told her what had happened. She didn't offer sympathy, which is actually what I needed. She offered 2 hours of her time and a legal pad and walked me through what I needed to know about stepping into an operational leadership role. I took 4 pages of notes. I hired a CFO in the first month. I couldn't afford not to. His name was Mr. Okafor, and he had 20 years of experience in construction finance, and he looked at our books and said, your grandfather was conservative to a fault, which means you have runway. I didn't know what that meant yet. I learned. The employees were harder. There were people at Whitfield and Sons who had worked there for 20, 30 years. People who had known my grandfather since before I was born. They looked at me and I could see the question behind their eyes. Who are you to run this? I didn't try to answer it with words. I started showing up early. I walked job sites. I asked questions and actually listened to the answers. I made decisions when decisions needed to be made, and when I didn't know enough to make a good decision, I said so and asked for help. I don't think I won everyone over in those first months, but I think I convinced most of them that I was trying. My uncle called me 6 weeks after the reading. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 2 minutes long and said, in essence, that the house was more expensive to maintain than he'd expected, that his own business interests had encountered some challenges, and that surely we could discuss some kind of arrangement where he received a consulting role at Whitfield and Sons. I called him back the next day. I'm not going to give you a job, I said. But I want to be clear that decision has nothing to do with what happened at the house. It has to do with the fact that I need people around me who are there because they want to build something, not because they want access to something. Those are different things. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, your grandfather would have handled this differently. Maybe, I said, but he left it to me. I didn't hear from him again for 4 months. When he called the second time, something in his voice had changed. The edge was gone. He said he'd been thinking about what I said. He said he thought maybe I was right. He said, and this surprised me, that he was sorry for what he'd said at the house that night. I don't know if I believe the apology. I don't know if it matters whether I believe it or not. What I know is this. My grandfather spent 40 years building something out of nothing because he believed that the way you do things matters as much as what you get done. He used to say that reputation is just character with a long memory. I used to think that was something old people said. Now I run a company and I understand that it's actually a business strategy. Whitfield and Sons had its best revenue year in the company's history the year after I took over. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it because I want you to understand what's possible when someone is actually paying attention. I still drive past that house sometimes. My uncle sold it 8 months ago. It turned out the maintenance and property taxes were more than he could comfortably carry, and he took an offer. I don't know where he's living now. I didn't ask. I kept my grandfather's watch. Mr. Calloway had it set aside for me separately with a note in my grandfather's handwriting that just said, for Valerie. My name is Valerie. He never called me by my full name when he was alive. It was always Val or Kiddo, or once, memorably, my greatest project. But there was something about seeing it written out in full, in his hand, on a piece of paper he'd prepared while he was already sick and he knew what was coming. It made me feel seen in a way I didn't know I was still waiting for. I keep the watch in my desk drawer at the office. Not because I don't want to wear it, but because I like knowing it's there. Some mornings when I come in early and the building is quiet and the weight of the week is already on my shoulders, I open that drawer and I look at it and I think, he knew. He saw something in me before I saw it in myself, and he trusted me with the thing he'd spent his whole life building. I don't take that lightly. I never will.